Today, I want to share with you 8 things that, in my opinion, build wealth faster than anything else. And the first one is that winning is as much about avoiding mistakes as it is anything else. They say that in tennis, the pros, it's all about making that great shot. But for most of us in tennis, the secret to winning is just getting the ball back over the net and of letting the other person make a mistake. And in many ways, investing is the same thing. It's really about not doing anything silly, not making any big mistakes. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is the value of having a concentrated portfolio versus a diversified portfolio. And what I can share with you, having been a financial advisor for over 20 years, is that many of my clients came to me and they had built their wealth through concentration. Not, it wasn't half of my clients, but it was more than 15 or 20%. Oftentimes, those were small business owners. They had spent 10, 15, 20 years building a company, and the majority of their wealth was tied into the success of that company. And when they came to me, they had successfully sold their company or were thinking about doing that in a few years. So concentration can be a great way to build wealth, but you want to be careful. Don't forget rule number one about not making mistakes. But once you've won, if that's your situation, concentration is a great way to build wealth, but diversification is a great way to keep wealth. And so if you're a small business owner, really guard that nest egg and do what you can to make your business successful. Obviously, if you're not a small business owner, I think thinking about rule number one, we want to avoid making a mistake. So there's a lot to be said for diversification. Okay, number three, and it's amazing how these all tie into number one. Number three is to avoid being a forced seller in a down market. So how do people end up being a forced seller in a down market? If you're still working, if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or younger or older, if you're still working, the way you avoid being a forced seller in a down market is just primarily for most people in that situation would be debt. Debt debt would force them to be a forced seller. You have to make a debt payment, you have to pay off a loan, a home equity loan, whatever it is, and you just don't have the cash. Another way you could be a forced seller in a down market if you're still working is just the angst. If you've got a portfolio that's heavily in stocks and the stock market goes down 30, 40, 50%, the worrying can get to a level where it becomes angst, and it keeps you up at night. And to stop the pain, you're willing to be a seller, and the emotional pain is what makes you a forced seller. The other way is you lose your job. You or your spouse lose your job, and you have cash flow needs, and you don't have an emergency fund. Now, if you're retired, the most common way a retiree becomes a forced seller in a down market is they need the money for their living expenses. So the way to avoid that is to think about your portfolio not necessarily in percentages. I'm 60% in the stock market, 40% in bonds, just making up a number here. I should say none of this is financial advice. I don't know your situation. But instead of thinking of your portfolio as 60/40, I'd encourage you to think of your portfolio as I've got 5 years worth of living expense in high quality, short duration bonds, and even if the market goes down, I don't need to sell my stocks in order to meet my living expenses. So instead of percentages, think about your bond portfolio as how many years. And I said 5 years. What's the gold standard? I don't know, 7 or 10 years would be great, to not have to touch your stocks. Few of us can afford to do that, but just the point is to think about your portfolio as your bonds as years of living expenses. Again, to avoid being a forced seller in a down market. The next issue that helps you build wealth faster than anything else is just thinking about taxes. Taxes do matter. Let me give you an example. If you buy a stock, if you buy an exchange traded fund, and 6 months later it's done really well and you say you want to sell, well, that's going to be taxed as short-term capital gains. And if you hold on to that position for a year, you're going to be taxed as long-term capital gains. Now, taxes are important, but we don't want the tax tail to wag the portfolio dog. So if you've had a position that's done really well and you think it's time to sell, better to harvest those gains and pay taxes on them than lose those. Where it gets really difficult is, let's say it's December and you've done well by the position, but let's say you bought that position on January 1. Do you hold on to it till January 1, which January 2, which would give you long-term capital gain status? Should say I'm not an accountant, talk to an accountant, but I want to put this on your radar screen again. In this case, do you wait till January 2 to sell, or do you sell it in December? There's no right or wrong answer. Each case is specific, but in this example, not only does it allow you to qualify for long-term capital gains, but instead of paying those taxes um, in the following April, if you sell in December, if you wait till January 2nd, those taxes might not be due till the following year because you're in a different calendar year. Again, talk to an accountant about all of this. Okay, so as you can see, it gets complicated. I want to share with you my 3 rules that uncomplicate all of this and just get it right down to the basics. But before I do, based on this complication, I want to encourage you, again, work with a financial advisor, work with an accountant. If you're not going to do that, use software that's designed for you to help you come up with your own financial plan, your own retirement plan. The software that I like is called Bolden. You can find a link for Bolden in the description here. Okay, what are my 3 rules? My 3 rules are very simple, but I think very powerful. And that is, no matter how much we make, spend less than what we earn. Over half of all Americans making $100,000 a year don't save a dime. So easier said than done. No matter how much you make, spend less than what you earn. The next one is one house, and the third one is one spouse. Spend less than what you earn, one house, one spouse. That will get you through a lot of storms. I realize that, I say the one spouse and somewhat in jest because it rhymes, but not every relationship is meant to last forever, but it's worth investing that time and money and effort into keeping your relationship as strong as you can. Okay, the one house, in today's day and age with Airbnb, VRBO, do we really need to have 2 houses? For me personally, I don't want to. It's your money. You've worked hard for it, spend it your way, but just be careful. Okay. The next one is the idea of doing it yourself versus hiring a pro. I think when it comes to taxes, when it comes to our healthcare expenses, and even when it comes to your retirement plan, there's a lot to be said for hiring a pro that's helped hundreds of people through these questions, through these situations, know what matters, know what doesn't matter. Make sure that you're not forgetting anything. Again, mea culpa, I was a financial advisor for 20 years. Um, Number 7 is slow versus fast, the tortoise versus the hare. And frankly, I'm a get-rich-slow person, uh, which might be why I had to work till I was 59. But it's because I'm somewhat risk adverse. And then the last one, I just want to remind all of us that our health is much more important than our wealth, which is why I made this video here. Why waiting to 65 to retire might be a big mistake. Thanks for watching this video. Bye-bye.